Whenever there is a mention of heritage, old traditions, and customs, invariably two thought streams seem to emerge. One says, burn the old, throw it away, while the other says, old is gold. Do we have to choose between one or the other of these conflicting ideologies? Or is there a golden mean between the two? Can we create a constantly evolving, ever new culture by weaving together the threads from the ancient wisdom and the pragmatism and new knowledge of today? That is what we are attempting to do here. Hello, you are listening to the podcast Something Old, Something New. I am your host, Rohini Abhyankar. Episode 16, The Glory of Saturn, a story full of lessons. A few years ago, I came across a book, The Greatness of Saturn, a Therapeutic Myth, by Dr. Robert Swoboda, based on Shani Mahatmya. The book is a free translation of Shani Mahatmya written in Gujarati, and the preface mentions that the original story was in Marathi. Before reading this book, I had only heard of Shani Mahatmya in the passing. I read through it quickly due to time constraints, but even afterwards, while busy with my work, I couldn't shake the impression that the story of Saturn had left a lasting mark. It was unclear who originally wrote the story. Some sources attributed it to Veda Vyas, while others suggested it dates back to medieval times. The story is said to have originated and gained popularity in Maharashtra and Western India. However, the focus today is not on when or where the story was written, but rather on the story's content and what I learned from it. I searched for the Marathi version of Shani Mahatmya and found it on the archives on archives.org. I read this small booklet written as a in a scripturish document. I read it carefully, and once again I felt that this seemingly mythical tale was imparting profound lessons. This episode of the podcast is dedicated to sharing the insights I gained from this story. Saturn is the slowest moving planet in our solar system, taking 30 years to orbit around the Sun. This slow pace is referred to in Sanskrit as Shanai Shanai, meaning slowly or gradually, giving Saturn its name Shanaishchara. For those who believe in astrology and horoscopes, Saturn is often surrounded in an aura of fear and mystery, particularly regarding the infamous period known as Sade Sati. However, belief in astrology is a personal matter and not our topic of today. Today's focus is on the story aspect of Shani Mahatmya. Since the story refers to the concept of horoscope, houses, astrological signs, and the Sade Sati, the 7.5 years of Shani's influence, to fully understand the story, we need to briefly touch upon these concepts about planetary influences. All planets revolve around the Sun in their respective orbits in the sky. The map of the sky, divided into 12 sections, represented on paper, is the horoscope. Each section, or house as it is called, represents a specific section area of the sky, and such a map of the sky at the time of the individual's birth is the person's birth chart or horoscope. The study of how planets influence humans and life on Earth is astrology. Now, what is Sadesati? Generally believed to be a tough time in an individual's life, in simple terms, Sadesati begins when Saturn enters the house preceding the one with moon's placement in one's birth chart. It lasts 7.5 years, with 2.5 years in the house preceding the moon's house, 2.5 years where the moon is in the zodiac sign, and 2.5 years past the moon's sign. As Saturn stays in each house for 2.5 years, the total period is 7.5 years. While belief in astrology and Sadisati is a personal choice, one thing is certain: everyone faces difficult times in life, learns valuable lessons, and grows through challenges. The name of this challenging time may vary as Sadisati or simply a rough patch, but it spares no one. The Shani Mahatmya story is the story of Saturn and King Vikramaditya, how Saturn put Vikramaditya through trying times and how Vikramaditya waded through them, emerging an evolved and a noble human being. I also found various different ways of dealing with challenges, and I hope to share my takeaways with you. Let's turn to the story now. Before presenting the story, I humbly bow to higher powers, asking for grace and guidance. Now, dear listeners, listen closely. This is the story of King Vikramaditya, the ruler of Ujjain. He was a just, duty bound king who cared deeply for his subjects. One day, while scholars gathered in his court, a discussion arose about planets and their supremacy, with each scholar describing the qualities of a different planet. The first scholar praised the sun, saying, "The sun is a benevolent planet. Those who worship him face no troubles from other planets, their crises are resolved, and their wishes fulfilled. The sun, Narayan, illuminates the eye of all." The second scholar spoke of the moon. "The moon is calm, has 16 phases, is beautiful, and causes no harm. It adorns Lord Shiva's forehead, nourishing vegetation and bestowing blessings." The third scholar praised Mars, saying, "Mars is brave and fierce. Although sharp in nature, it protects those who please it both inwardly and outwardly." The fourth scholar spoke of Mercury as a gentle planet. One blessed by Mercury can use intelligence to find a way out of any situation. The next scholar highlighted Jupiter, saying, "Jupiter's word is respected by all other planets. As the guru of gods, he destroys both good and bad karmas." Then came Venus, the guru of demons, whose power includes the Sanjivani art that can revive the dead. Venus, too, was praised for both punishing and rewarding people. Another scholar mentioned Rahu and Ketu, known as malefic planets that cause suffering, but it can be alleviated with worship and praise. Finally, when King Vikramaditya asked if there were any other planets left, a scholar stepped forward to discuss Saturn. He described Saturn as belonging to the oil making caste, lame in one leg but strong in body. Saturn, a fierce planet, can bring either smooth, uninterrupted life or severe hardships. Explaining Saturn's gaze, the scholar mentioned that Saturn, son of the sun, star, the sun, and Chaya, cast his gaze on his father at birth, causing the son to be afflicted with skin disease. His charioteer became lame, and his horses blind. Despite all attempts at atonement and forgiveness, relief was only found when Saturn's gaze shifted away, restoring things to their original state. Hearing this, King Vikramaditya mockingly laughed, clapped, and said, "What kind of son harms his own father? What good is such a son?" At that very moment, Saturn happened to be passing by the court in his iron chariot. Angered by the king's words, Saturn descended and warned the king of a lesson he would soon learn. Despite the king's pleas, Saturn declared that when he came to Vikramaditya's sign, the signs that we talked about in the beginning, He would teach him a lesson and then left. Realizing what lay ahead, Vikramaditya prepared himself mentally for the ordeal. One day, a horse trader appeared in the kingdom with beautiful horses. One of the king's ministers chose a horse, but the trader insisted that the king himself ride and try it. Vikramaditya couldn't resist such a fine horse, so he mounted it. As soon as he did, the horse took off at an incredible speed, flying through the air. The king quickly realized it was Saturn's doing and resigned himself to whatever lay ahead. The horse took him far to a dense forest where it vanished, leaving him to wander until he reached the border of another kingdom exhausted. While standing near a merchant's shop, the merchant noticed a sudden increase in customers and attributed it to Vikramaditya. Taking the king into his home and taking him for a good match for his daughter, he offered his hospitality. That night, as the king rested, the merchant's daughter, dressed in jewelry, entered his chamber, hoping to gain his attention. But Vikramaditya pretended to sleep, curious to understand the situation. While she eventually grew tired, removed her jewelry, and fell asleep beside him, an extraordinary incident occurred. A swan emerged from a nearby painting, swallowed her valuable pearl necklace, and returned to the wall. Stunned, the king was left in disbelief. In the morning, the daughter found her necklace missing and accused Vikramaditya, declaring him a thief to her father. Despite his innocence, the merchant was convinced otherwise and threatened to bring him before the king. Stripped of his limbs, Vikramaditya was thrown outside the kingdom, forbidden food or water, on penalty of harsh punishment. Deprived and helpless, he survived in this state for many days. One day, a bride from Ujjain, traveling with her new family, recognized him, took pity, and brought him to her husband's family, a family of oil makers. Over time, Vikramaditya's spirit and resilience grew. He eventually found solace chanting divine melodies that filled the city with light, capturing the attention of everyone, including the king's daughter, Padmasena. Upon discovering the source of the chants, she was intrigued and asked for him to be brought to her. Recognizing the beauty of his melodies and his deep resilience, she found herself moved and enchanted by his music. The king had now learned his lesson, and Saturn, having felt that the punishment given to him was enough, appeared before him and said, I am pleased with the way you have patiently endured this difficult time. Ask for a boon, and I shall grant whatever you desire. The king bowed to Saturn's feet and replied, O Lord Saturn, grant me a boon that no one else has to suffer as I have. Hearing this, Saturn was astonished. He said, O king, you are truly noble. Rather than asking for your own limbs or body to be restored, you have asked for others to be spared from suffering. Nonetheless, I'll restore your body to its original form and grant you an additional boon. Even then, the king made the same request that no one else should have to endure his suffering. Saturn was amazed once more. He promised to restore the king's kingdom and said, anyone who faces my influence is bound to face hardships. Even great beings could not escape my impact. Then Saturn told King the story about Jupiter, the guru of the gods. The story goes like this: Jupiter, the revered guru of the gods, was informed by Saturn that his influence was soon coming to Jupiter's sign. Jupiter, in his great wisdom and stature, pleaded with Saturn, saying, Please do not enter my sign. Saturn replied, It's not possible for me to avoid your sign, but I can reduce the impact to just 2.5 years instead of the usual 7.5. Jupiter still resisted, saying, No, even that is unacceptable. Please do not come to my sign. Saturn explained, If I do not come to your sign, no one in the world will respect me. I can make compromise by visiting your sign for only 2.5 ghatika, about an hour. After considering this, Jupiter thought, 2.5 ghatika is not too long. I will manage I will manage my rituals, baths, and other activities during that time, and it will pass quickly. So he agreed. When the time came for Saturn to visit Jupiter's sign, Jupiter went to the river to perform his bathing and morning rituals. On his way back, he encountered Saturn, disguised as a watermelon seller. The sight of such beautiful watermelons tempted Jupiter. So he bought two and wrapped them in his dhoti or garment to carry home. But under Saturn's gaze, Jupiter's body turned pitch black and lusterless. Meanwhile, in the king's court, a crisis was unfolding. The king's son and the prime minister's son, who had gone hunting, hadn't returned for quite some time. The king sent soldiers to search for the two young men. The soldiers soon encountered Jupiter, who was now completely black in appearance, carrying two large objects wrapped in his dhoti. Suspicious, they stalked him and discovered, instead of watermelons, the severed heads of the prince and his friend. The soldiers, shocked, bound Jupiter and took him to the king. Realizing that this was all Saturn's doing, Jupiter understood the situation. Presented before the king, Jupiter was sentenced to death by impalement. A stake was erected, and preparations were made for his execution. Knowing that his 2.5 ghatika were nearly over, Jupiter pleaded with the guards to delay a little longer, offering them gold coins in exchange for the wait. The guards agreed, and as the time passed, the prince and the prime minister's son rode into the kingdom safely on horsebacks. The king, informed of this, apologized to Jupiter, now restored to his original form, and released him. Thus, this story illustrates how Saturn taught even the guru of the gods a lesson in humility. Later, Saturn said to King Vikram, Why are you so surprised by what happened to the Guru? I even came into the sign of Mahadev, Lord Shiva. Here is a version of that story. Mahadev, the controller of the universe, without whose will nothing moves, also had to face my influence. When I informed him that I would be entering his sign, Mahadev firmly replied that I should not come into his sign. I reminded him that he already knew my duty was to bring the consequences of one's karma. It is inevitable that I come to everyone's sign, and I could offer no more than 2.5 moments of trying times for you. That's around 2.5 seconds. Mahadev agreed, but when the time came, he hid briefly behind a rock. As soon as the 2.5 seconds passed, he emerged, acting as if nothing had happened, and asked Saturn if he was supposed to be coming to his sign for Sadisati. Saturn laughed and replied, Mahadev, you are all powerful and the supreme being of the universe. Yet you had to hide for even those 2.5 moments, and this says it all. Afterward, Saturn explained to King Vikram the meaning of Saturn's influence, saying, I was born to give everyone the fruits of their good and bad deeds in due time. Even I couldn't escape the consequences of my own karma. Ravan, the great king, had placed me on the steps of his palace, face down, where I lay bound for years, suffering his kicks until one of my legs became somewhat impaired. But ultimately, even those who humbly learn their lessons earn the rewards of their good deeds. This completes the story of Saturn's influence. When I read the story, it stirred many thoughts in me. The beauty of stories is that they allow us to learn indirectly. As we listen to the story, the events occur with somebody else, but the message they convey can be insightful. From this perspective, I noticed several underlying messages and symbolism in these tales, such as the period of Saturn's Sadesati is a time for learning humility. In everyone's life, events occur that help us set our egos aside and recognize greater forces beyond us, making us humble. The time of hardship and lessons may depend on several factors such as one's spiritual and karmic stature. Imagine the helplessness that a great king like Vikramaditya must have felt when his limbs were severed. This jolt must have made him incredibly humble. This story also offered ways to navigate through challenging times. The first method, followed by King Vikram, was to endure everything that came his way without complaint or resentment and without blaming others. His powerful sense of empathy, wishing no one else to suffer as he did, and his ability to understand others' minds were profound. I saw a real life example of such endurance. There was a gentleman known to my parents, let's call him Mr. Kunte. He worked at a bank and faced allegations of embezzlement, leading to years of court battles before he was proven innocent. In the end, he received his full pay and all his past dues. Like King Vikram, he endured hardships, but his patience and endurance ultimately helped his family overcome the challenges. The second approach was adopted by the Guru, which was buying time. The Guru recognized that Saturn had orchestrated his hanging as a lesson. Acknowledging this, the Guru offered the guards gold coins to buy some extra moments, ultimately saving his life. I once saw an example of this in real life. A gentleman I knew was about to leave his long held job for a new one, but learned that a new law was soon to take effect, allowing government employees, which he was, to collect their provident fund if they stayed till the law took effect. Though the new job paid better, this gentleman delayed his joining date until the law was enacted, saving a considerable sum in the process. Even though this wasn't a grand amount, it made a significant difference. The third method was quite simply to hide, which is what Mahadev did. When a formidable enemy comes our way, we don't always need to confront it head on. Sometimes concealing oneself to evade a powerful threat is a reasonable approach. Another way to deal with difficult times is represented by the way Hanuman faced Saturn's influence. This tale isn't part of Saturn's story, but is worth mentioning for its humor and wisdom. When Saturn came to Hanuman's sign, Hanuman was in the midst of using his head to knock down trees. Saturn asked where he could sit, and Hanuman replied, "Sit on my head," and continued his work. Saturn struck down, Hanuman struck down tree after tree, each hit shaking Saturn. Unable to tolerate the relentless impacts, Saturn quickly left Hanuman's head. The moral? Stay focused on your work with determination, no matter how hard or challenging the work. So, this is the story of King Vikram and Saturn, with additional tales of the Guru, Mahadev, and possibly a folk tale about Hanuman. These stories convey the importance of humility, the dangers of pride, and four different approaches for handling tough situations: surrendering gracefully, buying time, concealing oneself, and working with steadfastness. Now I'll stop here for today. Did you know these stories? What do you think of the four approaches to address difficult times? Any ideas or thoughts of your own? Do share your comments. Till then, namaste.